we bring her in. So give a warm welcome for Miss Grace Reilly.
Grace, thank you so much for coming back on the show today. We had you on the show prior to the election in 2024 to break down all of the gun owners in America, why they are not coming out to the polls, why they aren't even registering to vote, and they're some of the biggest advocates for the Second Amendment. But we have a lot to get into today. You are now working for the Restoration of America, an incredible organization that's boots on the ground, really fighting for America, fighting for just the tools to equip Americans with what our founding fathers actually intended this nation to be. Unfortunately, many people don't understand that. I love your content. You are booming. You are growing tremendously on Instagram. I remember when I first met you, you had around 15, 16,000 followers, and now you've got over 60K on Instagram. So that is when you know you're doing and putting out great content. Grace, if you don't mind sharing a little bit about yourself real quick, who you are, what Restoration of America is, and what you guys are doing to educate the next generation.
Yeah, well, first of all, you are so kind. Thank you so much. And I can say the same to you. Just even watching your show and the way it's grown has been so incredible. And it's always just so great to join you. So thank you so much for having me. But yes, Restoration of America is exactly what it sounds like. Our mission is to restore America and to recenter and refocus around American values. So that's a lot of what I've always done, just tried to focus on Christian conservative values and especially bring that to the younger generation, which I know you do as well, Hannah. But this company has been a really great one to work with to be able to do that. And we focus on a lot of different areas, from restoring the military so that, we're eliminating wokeness and DEI. We have a recent project out on that, to ending abortion and focusing on the sanctity of life, to just American principles more broadly, and of course, to combating Marxism and Marxist tactics to take over our country.
Yes, that's right. Yes. I love your videos showcasing what these Marxists actually say, because, we hear bits and pieces here and there, but nobody has really listened. Nobody has actually read the books and the writings from what these Marxist and tyrannical leaders in history have actually said out of their mouth. So I appreciate that you guys do that. Now, if you don't mind going back to what you said, restoring the media, the military, restoring trust back into our military and the men that are on the front lines, and really just restoring credibility back, because obviously under the previous administration, a lot of that was taken. We were being forced to fund and give our tax dollars to sex change surgeries, which we know is impossible to even change someone's sex, but these attempted sex change surgeries on people entering into the military. What are you guys doing at ROA to really kind of restore not just credibility, but restore strength back into our military and our men and women who are on the front lines?
Yeah, absolutely. Our military is so deeply important. This is something that all Americans can agree on. And our company is focused on encouraging the current administration to re-warriorize our military. So we've done that through a website called restorethemilitary.com, which you can go check out. And what we're doing is calling out DEI and leaders who are promoting DEI within the military and encouraging Pete Hegseth and the current administration to do everything that they can to be aware of this, to weed out DEI from the military, because restoring credibility is so important, especially for having, young people continue to join our great military and just keep the mission alive of, just preserving and saving and being the warriors that are keeping our country the greatest it can be and protecting all of us and our freedom. But of course, it's deeper than that, in the sense of, are we as a country, is our military ready? God forbid we get into another war, or is wokeness going to get in the way of our lethality and military's greatness? So we're really focused on, for the safety of our own military members, making sure the military is focused on the right things, is focused on lethality, is focused on uniformity, all of the things that they need to be able to be in a war and be successful, and obviously keep everyone as safe as possible. And all these things are so deeply important. And focusing on DEI or wokeness in the military is just taking away from the important focus that the military should have, which is preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's mind-boggling to think that we've even reached a point where we even have to get something as DEI out of the workplace, and especially something as important as our military.
We've never gotten there in the first place. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. It is so wild. And I think those are the questions that we should be asking. It's like, how did foreign nationals get to our college campuses being funded by American taxpayers? How did we get to the point where we have DEI in our military and in our hiring practices in the United States of America? Those are the questions that we should be asking, which is obviously what you're doing at your organization and just on a personal level. But even going towards just the free speech and the parental rights aspect, because there's so many issues facing our country and that we're fighting for and against right now. But a big one has been parental rights and free speech. This week at the United States Capitol, I believe it was on Monday, Andy Ogles, Representative Ogles, and several others, Andy Biggs, held a vindicating parents fighting for parental rights. Obviously, during the previous administration, there was a lot of parental rights that were under attack by the previous administration, and even going forward by these local school districts and even on the federal level, some of these individuals that need to be fired that President Trump and this administration are working on getting out, that are definitely trying to strip parents of their parental rights. That is just a given. It shouldn't even be a topic of discussion. But talk about that for people who maybe had no idea that there was a rally in front of the United States Capitol fighting for parental rights, going back to what they did during COVID-19, literally labeling parents as domestic terrorists for protecting their children. Talk about that. What happened at the United States Capitol and why is this so important?
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason for this rally is that so many of us don't know how deep this goes. I even learned in doing research about this topic how bad it really was for parents. These are underreported stories in a lot of different ways. There are countless examples of school boards trying to create a rift between parents and their children straight out of the Marxist playbook. And we will not forget when Merrick Garland categorized parents as domestic terrorists merely for standing up for their children in 2021. Luckily, parents are fighting back against this. There were many parents who were personally victimized by this because the DOJ and FBI were sent out and weaponized to target parents in an attempt to silence them during this time. And again, this is something that has not gotten nearly enough attention, which is why they ended up having this rally in the Capitol. One of the parents who's an example of someone that was targeted throughout all of this is Kelly Walker. He's a father who was given a year in prison, or 100 days in prison and $10,000 in fines just for standing up for his child during the COVID years. I mean, this is insane stuff to be happening in the United States of America. I find it completely mind-boggling that such injustice and weaponization of our government took place against parents. And that's why it's so important that we make sure that this gets enough attention and it never happens again. So the parents who were out there and a few congressmen and representatives that were out there speaking at this rally had the goal of bringing more attention to this and hopefully encouraging the Trump administration to sign an executive order relating to the topic.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Yeah, Kelly, he's an incredible patriot. He's a family man. And I know Sam Sorbo was out there, and I heard from some of the legislators. We're going to play some of the clips for the audience to be able to hear what really went down and what these legislators and parents were saying. Because like you said, I mean, it was egregious how our government, our federal government, was weaponized against parents, against pro-lifers, against people that were there on January 6th. I mean, the list is endless of how many people were persecuted by our federal government. And the people that the stories that we get to hear, the stories that we hear from, it almost sounds like it happened in a communist country, but no, it happened in the United States of America. And I think that's what should frighten every single American, every single concerned parent and concerned patriot watching this right now to get involved and to take a stand, because this was just a couple years ago. This is how quick things can change. This is how fast things can go from what seems to be normal to tyranny, from a tyrannical government. So I want to get into one last thing before we conclude with you, Grace. I really appreciate you joining today's show. On a topic of free speech and parental rights, you just saw the IRS come out and say that churches now have the opportunity to endorse political candidates, which personally, I think that the IRS should never, or the federal government at all, should ever have the authority to tell what churches can or cannot say. That is a church. We left England to get away from a state-sponsored religion, and here we are in 2025, where our federal government and the IRS and other entities, other three-letter agencies want to tell the church when they can be open, when they can't be open, and what they can and cannot say. So it's crazy, again, that we're even talking about this, but what was your response to this? Kind of give some background to the Johnson Amendment, how it even led to the point where the IRS was saying the church can't say this or they can say this, to now they can endorse political candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. So this amendment has been in place since 1954, so about 70 years. And it's now, so the Trump administration for years, so Trump since 2017 has been advocating for repealing this. And what just happened is an agreement and a settlement between Trump's IRS and just kind of clarifying what the Johnson Amendment means, saying that churches can, in good faith, talk to their congregations about a variety of issues, including some that could technically be deemed political without violating this amendment. So what it does is it removes this muzzle that was placed on churches unjustly and unconstitutionally to kind of be able to control what they were able to say to their congregations. And what this really does deep down is it allows churches to be able to stand firmly on biblical principles without fear of the IRS coming at them for their tax-exempt status, because this has been a real concern for churches. And it's important to note that the government was always supposed to stay out of the church, but the church was never supposed to be muzzled from talking about current affairs that were affecting their environment, their country, and the state. The church has a right to comment on these issues as deemed biblically fit. And I think it's important to note too that even with this move in the right direction that gives churches, this freedom to really stand more firmly on biblical principles, of course, churches should still use wisdom, discernment, and lean heavily on the Lord whenever addressing any issues in this area. But it really is a constitutional win. It's righting a 70-year wrong, and it's something that should be celebrated.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say to the Christians out there who say that the church should never endorse a political candidate? I've heard that being an argument used, that the church should stay out of it, the church shouldn't get involved in politics, which obviously we know, at least I believe the reason why we're here is because the church has allowed the government to get involved in the church sphere and allow Marxist ideas to infiltrate the church as a whole across the country. And that's why we're seeing the things that we're seeing, because the church has refused to talk about so-called political issues. But what would your response be to the Christian, the conservative out there that says, I think this is horrible all around. The church should stay out of politics. The church should stay out of endorsing political candidates?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you bring up a really good point that part of the problem, just to backtrack slightly before answering your question with the Johnson Amendment, is that it really was kind of two-tiered, where the left was getting away with stuff like that and the right wasn't, and then was being confronted a lot more heavily. But to get to your question, the point is there's no neutral ground, as C.S. Lewis said. So there's a context that we live in, and the church should be delivering timeless truths that are not related to just the current affairs of the day. The church should be focused on the eternal truths that are found in the gospel. But with that being said, there's nothing new under the sun, and the issues that we face today are very relevant and worth addressing in the church as it becomes relevant. And the church should have the ability to do that. It's unconstitutional for the church not to be able to. And even with this amendment, it kind of went deeper than just whether you're specifically endorsing a political candidate or just kind of making different points. Constitutionally, churches, again, while leaning on God, should be able to have this ability without the government restricting it. I do still think that churches should use caution and again, lean on the Lord to make decisions like that. But when we have issues like defending the unborn, that's a black and white issue that the church should have a clear position on, and that in a lot of times relates to a candidate. So in contexts like that, I would encourage Christians to really think about how, again, there's no neutral ground, and the church should be commenting on these really, really big issues like the sanctity of life, like saving children from mutilation. Also, there's all sorts of things like that the church should not ignore or shy away from and should confront head on. And I think, just quickly, John MacArthur is a good example of this. He just passed away, obviously, so rest in peace to him. But I think something that can be learned from him in his life is just the ability to talk about current events head on and in a way that's reflecting eternal truths. He did this very well in California when he called out Newsom time and time again in a respectful way, just pointing to things that were unbiblical and encouraging Newsom to lean on the Lord. There are ways to do this as churches that I would argue are the right way to do so.
Amen. That's exactly right. Yes. Yesterday we talked about John MacArthur and his legacy. I know I truly pray that it will live on, and I know that it will, but I guess it's up to us now to continue that legacy that he has written. And really, he was one of the most courageous, one of the most bold pastors and speakers, at least in our time, and I would even say throughout history as well. Like you said, I mean, he was debating Gavin Newsom over 15 years ago on the news, specifically CNN, on gay marriage and the potential of Obergefell versus Hodges being put into law, which obviously was put into law in 2015. But if enough pastors 15 years ago, 20 years ago had the courage that John MacArthur did to say, absolutely not. Actually, no, this is not what marriage is. Marriage is between a man and a woman. It is very simple. This is the way that God has designed it. And that's it. In a discussion, if enough pastors had the courage that MacArthur had, our country would be in a lot different, but also better scenario than it is today.
We're not called to sit on the sidelines. We're called to be involved in these issues. We're called to take a stand and to stand for God's truth.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Grace, I really appreciate you coming on the show today, and I'm sure my audience absolutely is enjoying you and all of the work that you're doing. How can people find you? If you have any last thoughts, feel free to share them.
Well, thank you so much, Hannah. It's been such a pleasure to be with you, and I loved being able to see you last week. You can find me on Instagram at Conservative Grace, X at Conserve Grace, and you can look up my company, restorationofamerica.com and restorethemilitary.com to check out all of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Grace. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so that was Grace Reilly joining the show today here on LFA